Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, or whenever you happen to be listening to this. Welcome to the Film Realist Podcast, the film and TV podcast from a complete nobody. That is hopefully for somebody. Welcome to the first episode of 2025, also known as episode 124. My name is Kyle Naranya, and this episode's going to be jam-packed with all kinds of lists. We're just coming off of the holiday break, and I know some people like to give out their lists of the favorite films they saw as the year's kind of coming to an end, but given that I'm off for 2 weeks leading into the holiday break, there's some films that I maybe didn't get a chance to see that I get a chance to finish, or a TV show, and I get to finish those seasons. So this episode is going to be full of my favorite films of 2024, my favorite TV seasons of 2024, and my most anticipated films of 2025. I'll have all these lists as images, and they'll come out as the week goes along, but I'm going to have them all in the episode here. So if you want to jump around, I'm going to tag each individual lists, and we'll have breaks in between if you did want to jump around. There should be no spoilers. It's just going to be my general reactions to these films and why they're in the place that they are. So let's start with my favorite TV seasons of 2024. There was a lot of great television in 2024, and there's going to be things not on this list that I'm sure people are going to negatively react to, but my point of these lists is not what's the best, but what was my favorite pieces of TV. That could be a returning show, a new show, or a potential miniseries. It goes without saying that there are honorable mentions, but things like Shogun, you know, everybody watch that. There's Slow Horses, another phenomenal TV show. But when I'm thinking about what makes my favorite kind of TV, it's usually a genre's itch, but also just really well-crafted storytelling. So my honorable mentions, there's kind of an amalgamation of things that Kyle likes, so they shouldn't necessarily be surprising. Honorable mention number 1 is X-Men 97. I did a whole review on it. I loved getting to go back to the X-Men universe, particularly that of the animated series. Obviously, I did have some criticism over what was likely due to budgetary reasons with the way that the characters moved in 2-dimensional/3D space, but from a story standpoint, regardless of the fact that it was slightly rushed, I'm really excited to get to see characters we are used to with a more mature lens, and growing up with the audience where you're having a property that you saw as a child potentially is something I think they did really effectively. So there's that. The next honorable mention is Superman and Lois season 4, which most of these things I should probably just say ahead of time, likely reviewed them on the podcast. Superman and Lois season 4, I believe is the best season of any of the Arrowverse shows, and likely, no, I'm not even going to say likely, it is, in my opinion, the best final season of any of the CW shows, probably ever, at least from the ones that I've seen. I've already pre-ordered the Blu-ray, so it's going to be joining my shelf just behind me. Another thing was Terminator Zero, a phenomenal reintroduction to the Terminator universe, putting it in a setting that was one we are unfamiliar with, particularly with what happens when Skynet is invading the world as a whole, but the conversation around artificial intelligence and how that's become a much more detail-oriented conversation on how it's going to affect humanity, and done through the anime lens, made for a really gripping TV show that I kind of hope provides an opportunity for those creatives in charge of Terminator to do similar to what we got with like Prey and Terminator Zero, which is put the Terminator in an interesting environment with new characters and have that be what's interesting about it, as opposed to always having to deal with the Sarah Connors of the world or the Kyle Reeses. Like, doing something new with new people was really entertaining. And the last honorable mention is Boys Season 4. I loved Boys Season 3 and was nervous because we were losing Soldier Boy. Is the momentum from the show going to be dissipating? But it didn't. It actually works phenomenally well as a penultimate season, ramping up the craziness of what's going on. And the fact that they were able to do that without pulling any of the story or making everything feel like setup was absolutely incredible. So I really commend them on doing that for a show that had a significant delay. And I commend Eric Kripke for delaying it because of the strikes and wanting people to be treated appropriately. The fact that he is a showrunner and a writer, and his history on working in network TV and streaming and being an advocate for all the different guilds and being paid properly. This is a show made by Amazon. You can afford to pay people what they're worth and livable wages. But I'm going to put down my picket sign and get into my list, and we're going to start at the bottom and go to the top. My fifth favorite show of 2024 was Star Wars Bad Batch Season 3. Rob and myself have talked a lot about the Disney Star Wars era of Disney Plus in particular. I reviewed The Acolyte. I reviewed Star Wars Bad Batch. I've reviewed, or probably talked about, Obi-Wan and all the other shows, and Andor as well. And Star Wars Bad Batch, outside of Andor, is the best thing that Disney has done on a television standpoint with this show. Dave Filoni and whoever worked with him on this manages to take characters that fill in that almost A-team vibe in the Star Wars universe, but at the same time, it still adds a level of depth and character to an era of the Star Wars universe that can seem like it's been overplayed from time to time, but the fact that we get this group of ragtag people who are kind of heroes by default because of their relationships, and each and every one of the characters, the way that their relationships evolve, becoming a family, a chosen family for each other, and having to go out and find Omega, responding to the death of a character. I guess I almost spoiled that, so I won't. But how that progresses the show moving forward and gives a really satisfying ending and feels of one of hope, which is the best parts of leading into closer to the original trilogy. It's what works so great about Rogue One, and it's an element here that worked so effectively with Star Wars Bad Batch Season 3. Number 4 of my favorite TV shows of 2024 is Shrinking Season 2. The last episode for this show quite literally came out in December on Christmas Day, 25th of 2024. And I saw a lot of criticism from one particular outlet that this show fails to be what makes it work in the first season. And I completely disagree with that sentiment. I didn't get a chance to review the show because of the way that the scheduling worked out for releasing it. But Shrinking manages to take all of the characters that we were introduced to in the first season, and I would argue all the focus for season 1 is on Jimmy, and season 2 spreads that out substantially more. Each of the characters that we were introduced to, we get a lot more of an opportunity to get more depth and more insight into each and every one of the main cast. What makes a much more meaningful season, because we understand all the dynamics between our ensemble, how the decisions that each of them have made, negatively or positively, affect all of their key and core relationships. Jimmy in particular with Alice, and the back and forth that they have about the relationship with the person who was responsible for the death of Jimmy's wife and Alice's mom, and the intricacies of loss and knowing what Jimmy went through prior to season 1 and what he was dealing with in season 1, and continually to push that envelope in season 2, discussing mental health being a real important aspect of the show, of course, but then also getting opportunities to see from characters like Harrison Ford, who is dealing with such a severe ailment with somebody who's so used to being in control with Paul, and how is his relationship and continually letting his friends and coworkers in, and how that has affected his life positively with somebody who, because of being so focused on career success, makes his life more meaningful, and he sees the benefit of having people in his life. If you haven't seen the monologue that Harrison Ford gives in the finale, it's absolutely worth checking out, particularly if you're somebody who has underestimated the performances that Harrison Ford is capable of. Shrinking Season 2 is a phenomenal continuation and really does feel like the middle point in this story. We see characters really push to the breaking point, and they manage to come back. So what is that going to mean moving forward into season 3? What are the challenges that they're going to face? Alice is now 18 and she's now going to be looking to go to post-secondary. How is that going to affect her relationship with Jimmy and everybody else around them, with Brian and his husband adopting a baby? How's that dynamic going to shift with that two people being parents? Brian in particular not being one who wanted to be a father, and how that's going to change everybody's relationship, particularly with the new baby. And we know that certain characters are looking forward to that. So I love Shrinking Season 2, and I'm really glad that we get something that scratches the same itch as Ted Lasso, but exploring an entirely different focus of the emotional spectrum. Number 3 of my favorite shows of 2024, Batman Caped Crusader. I reviewed this with Dylan Pollock of Movies to Watch Before You Die. Obviously, I love Batman. He is my favorite fictional character of all time. And the fact that it's brought to us by so many different creatives is the best possible answer for people who liked Batman the Animated Series or anything from the DCAU in general, or The Batman, which is an underrated show. I do like The Batman. Rino Romano is a good Batman Bruce Wayne. But then even Batman Brave and the Bold, we get something much more in the noir aspect of the character and exploring some modernizations while also still having the show feel like it is in this previous era of time. It's a show that really shows it understands what the version of Batman it's going to be that it presents, and the dynamics with Batman and Alfred being ones that we're not necessarily used to. It's really great, and I think from doing a episodic yet whole season arc as a whole, they really managed to do both of those jobs effectively. And where we are leading off into season 2, I'm really looking forward to that. HBO Max, this is a big L for you because this should not be on Amazon Prime, but it is. So thankfully for me, I get to watch it there and I don't have to worry about it. My second favorite show is ironic to me because the show came out at the beginning of 2024, but I didn't watch it until the fall. It's a show I haven't reviewed yet because it was so far after the release date, but I was obsessed with the soundtrack. Being raised a certain way with certain morals and beliefs, I thought there was a really funny, interesting way to explore these theological relationships, and that's Has Been Hotel. Number 2 of my favorite shows of 2024 is Has Been Hotel. It takes all of the Broadway musical elements and dealing with the dynamics of hell and heaven, angels and demons. What does it mean? Somebody trying to do what they can to bring good out of those people who are damned to hell. It was so good. The soundtrack is my most listened to album of 2024. I adored it. I can't wait for season 2. We know some of the relationships are certainly going to be different, and that's one of the probably through lines through all of my favorite shows is having rich, fulfilled character dynamics, meaningful relationships, or having serious antagonists for multiple reasons and having significant reasons behind characters' roles or morals makes this really interesting. And adult animation is something that in particular Amazon Prime is absolutely nailing, and I'm glad to have something that feels so solely unique to itself. I loved Has Been Hotel, and that's why it is number 2 on my favorite shows of 2024. Number 1 shouldn't really be surprising based on some of the things I've said in this TV wrap-up of my favorite shows. Number 1 of my favorite TV shows of 2024 was The Penguin. It was absolutely brilliant. It took the Batman universe, or the Batman epic crime saga, as Matt Reeves has said, and continued it in a televised fashion with the definitive performance of the Penguin from Colin Farrell, telling a Soprano-esque story with DC Comics characters, making Carmine Falcone a side character in this show, introducing characters that were new to the universe as a whole, but then having somebody like Christine Milioti show up as Sophia Falcone, and the relationships of the power vacuum of Gotham after the death of Carmine Falcone and what that means for Gotham City's underworld was absolutely brilliant, and I absolutely adored it. It's incredible. It's on Crave here in Canada if you haven't watched it yet. It's on HBO Max in the United States, and I'm sure it's available on Sky. I'm not sure where HBO is all around the world, but it gave a phenomenal continuation of the Batman universe and that story, and not just feeling like additional material, but a part 2 of this story until we get The Batman Part 2, unfortunately in 2027, a long ways away. But this show works because of its brilliant writing, I've said phenomenal a lot, but brilliant, meticulous performances of its main cast, and telling a very compelling story about the grittiness and the, quite honestly, horrible nature that people will go to achieve their ends and their goals. So that's my favorite 5 shows of 2024 and my honorable mentions. Now let's get into my 5 most anticipated shows of 2025. 2025 is going to have a lot of incredible seasons of television, and it shouldn't necessarily be shocking about what I'm really looking forward to. So starting at number 5 for most anticipated shows of 2025, I have Reacher Season 3. I love Reacher. I've always been a fan of Alan Ritchson, going all the way back to his appearances in Smallville as Aquaman, and then continuing as Hawk and Dove in Titans, and now finding a character that he so definitively performs and will be the Jack Reacher forever. It's awesome. I'm a sucker for a good detective story while still managing to maintain that level of action. And what this show is selling on the 3rd season, where we have a physical antagonist who maybe can also deal with Reacher on a psychological one or an intellectual one, is something I'm really looking forward to. Number 4 of my most anticipated shows of 2025 is Invincible Season 3. 1, because of the release for this. Thank you, Robert Kirkman, for just giving us it all in one go. I hated the gap in between. But this show, talking about building anticipation, continuing to feel as if everyone is on nerve because of what could possibly be coming down the line, really works for this show. Season 2 improved on everything that I liked and didn't like about Season 1, and I'm really hoping to see that exact same instance from Season 3. Number 3 of my most anticipated shows of 2025 is Andor Season 2, the final season of Andor. The best Star Wars thing Disney has ever done on Disney Plus. That's not really debatable. Personally, I'm a sucker for animation, so Bad Batch will always be tugging on my heartstrings, but telling a story about the political uprising of the rebellion and dealing with all of the dynamics of trying to do that while obviously not trying to be found out, and having an espionage level story within Star Wars, Tony Gilroy not caring about the fandom of Star Wars and just wanting to tell an absolutely well meticulated, precise story that doesn't deal with the fan service that people have come to expect from this universe. It's going to be chef's kiss. I would be completely surprised if this is not on most people's lists for best shows of 2025 when this year wraps up. Number 2, Daredevil Born Again. I haven't, to my knowledge, said this publicly on the podcast, but Charlie Cox, in my opinion, should go on the Marvel Mount Rushmore of actors to play Marvel characters. He is Daredevil and Matt Murdock. Everything you love about this character from the comic book page brought to life, he does that. And thankfully, Disney learned its lesson while producing this show, which is that it needed to be a continuation because of everybody's investment in the phenomenal Netflix series. To have everybody back, to have another story about Kingpin and Wilson Fisk. I mean, I know it's the same guy, but dealing with the politics, shocking, more politics, of becoming mayor and how that's going to affect his relationship and dynamic that he has with Daredevil. I'm really looking forward to this, and the fact that we are also getting some of the antagonists that we had seen in previous seasons. I hope this season 1 of this series, technically season 4 of the whole thing, really manages to maintain that expected quality from this. So that's why Daredevil Born Again is my number 2 of most anticipated TV shows. And number 1, it's one of my favorite video games of all time. It's going to be telling half of that story likely. My number 1 most anticipated show of 2025 is The Last of Us Season 2. I love the game. I don't care if you didn't. If you're mad at me for liking the game, that's entirely up to you. But I loved the story that The Last of Us Part 2 told. And we have some brilliant actors coming into this. And we are going to be put through the ringer emotionally. I'm prepared for that. I have been avoiding replaying the game. I know Last of Us Part 2 Remastered has come out. Yes, I own it. But I'm waiting to see how the TV series manages to handle that story, because they did such a... I said phenomenal too many times. But the way that they adapted this game of the first season and changed things and understanding the medium therein, I'm expecting really big things from The Last of Us Season 2, and obviously that's why it is my most anticipated show of 2025. Now, let's jump into my favorite films, there's 10 of them, of 2024. This list was quite hard to do. I went back and forth on a lot of things, and then some things I didn't go back and forth on. Honorable mentions go to Monkey Man. Everything on this list I did review, as I said in the TV show portion of that, so I'm not going to do that again. But Monkey Man, I adored that film. Having such a unique take on the action genre, putting it in India from Dev Patel, it's a great film and you should really check it out. The other's a documentary, but it's rare that I review them on the podcast, so I thought it was worth mentioning. It's now on streaming, so you can check it out if you'd like. Super Slash the Man, the Christopher Reeves story, is brilliant, giving us a full-faceted look into his life and his relationship with being Superman and how that affected his life as a whole, as well as the one that he had with his family, but not shying away from what could be construed as maybe negative personality traits, showing that he was a fully dimensional person and not just this incredible guy who always did the right things after being Superman. No, he's a real person and had his own difficulties through his life and how he reacted to his injury and how that affected what he focused his life on afterwards. It's really worth watching if you're a Superman fan or just love a really great documentary. I think you should check it out. Number 10 on my favorite films of 2024, Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. Matt Reeves made 2 incredible films in the rebooted Planet of the Apes trilogy. I was so nervous when they announced that they were going to be making more, and this is retrospective. I was also very nervous when they said that Wes Ball was going to be doing these. The idea to jump forward in time and to give us a film that is so closely brinking on the original film of Planet of the Apes, but still doing what works so effectively with the previous trilogy and weaving in elements that are concepts and ideas from the previous film franchise was done so smartly. And you would only know this if you're a fan of the original films, and the modernization and making these things seem more compelling and realistic, but not making them dark and gritty just for the sake of it, was really effective. And the new characters such as Noah, and we had a Caesar, what a wonderful day, and all of that made for a new entry into this universe, a new story to be set up, and I'm really looking forward on seeing where it goes. Number 9 of my favorite films of 2024, Blink Twice. It is so rare to get a film with a really cool idea that just seems that it is perfect for our time. And Zoe Kravitz and E.T. Feigenbaum, I don't think I'm saying that correctly and I apologize, but exploring the power dynamic of these rich billionaires and the unfortunate circumstances that women are put in because of these men with power and what they do with their power, and how these women react to the circumstances around them, and wrapping that up in a thriller on an island, bridging on horror elements, makes for a compelling, really interesting story that I haven't actually had a chance to rewatch yet, but I really enjoyed all of the intricate details that are planted throughout the story to kind of unravel the mystery as it is unveiled to you. If you haven't checked it out and you're one of those people who complains about unoriginal storytelling, it's definitely one you should be checking out. Number 8 on my favorite films of 2024, Saturday Night. I loved Saturday Night Live growing up, knowing about the original cast, my parents talking about some of the memorable sketches from that show back then. Having a film that certainly feels much more in Jason Reitman's wheelhouse than maybe the Ghostbusters films he's worked on lately. I've reviewed this, but each and all of these performances manage to feel like we are getting an inside look behind the curtain with these actors, as opposed to just a bunch of impressions happening. It's a film that's probably going to do quite well once it's on streaming. It underperformed at the box office, which is unfortunate. But if you're somebody who did at some point enjoy Saturday Night Live, it's definitely worth checking out to see the origins in this fictionalized version of that story. Number 7 of my most anticipated films of 2024, Wicked, Part 1. It's probably just going to be called Wicked as we move along, which is fine. I had always heard about the musical. Who hadn't? the fact that it was split up into two parts, that was concerning to me, but in my opinion, and this still holds from my review, is that Cynthia Erivo in particular gives the definitive performance as Elphaba Throp, and being completely shocked by Ariana Grande because the marketing, in my opinion, for this did not do her any favors. It is one of the soundtracks that will be the most listened to thing probably of 2025 because my daughter also loved it. And managing to make, while can seem overstuffed at times, half of the story really feel like it sets up things that are going to be quite meaningful in part 2 without feeling hollow and just to be set up. This is a spectacle that takes everything Jon M. Chu has learned from working in the film industry and making a Broadway stage musical captivating on the silver screen. And he does that very well, and that's why it is number 7. Number 6 of my favorite films of 2024, Nosferatu. I only saw this film a couple weeks ago, but telling essentially a remake or amalgamization of Dracula, Bram Stoker's Dracula and Nosferatu, but capturing everything we are familiar with, but doing it in a new way with some familiar tricks, but also some new ones, that Robert Eggers makes a film that is going to be the definitive version of this film moving forward. With some career-defining performances, this is a must-watch for horror fans or just film fans in general. Number 5 of my favorite films of 2024, Deadpool and Wolverine, a movie that had so much hype behind it. Of course, Hugh Jackman coming back as Wolverine was a big deal, but seeing the dynamic between these two characters, having somebody be the straight man and then Deadpool obviously being, the pansexual man, makes a film that I can understand criticism to it be hollow and just full of gags, but the center of the movie is about the emotional stakes of Wade Wilson and Logan. And that stuff worked for me. It's a movie that could feel hollow, and if you're looking for it to be that, it could be. But it's a film I've rewatched multiple times, and we've seen a lot of great performances from Hugh Jackman as Wolverine, and Logan being the highest of highs, managing to even get somewhere near there while still being enwrapped in a Deadpool movie, that's something special. So that's why Deadpool and Wolverine is number 5. Number 4 of my favorite films in 2024, We Live in Time. Andrew Garfield and Florence Pugh just make a little movie that talks about the meaning of a relationship, using time, exploring that relationship through non-linear formats, and showing the significant events that defined who they are to each other, what it means to be a parent, and your loss of life when your clock is ticking. It's a beautiful story that will probably make you cry, but shows that when you have a great director, an incredible script by Nick Payne, and 2 brilliant actors, some of the best of our time, you get something like this, which wasn't a huge movie, but it's definitely one worth watching, which is why it is number 4 on my list. Number 3 of my favorite films of 2024, Inside Out 2. Growing up with Riley is going to be a heavy and serious subject matter. Dealing with anxiety, depression, laissez-faire, embarrassment. Having those concepts be relatable and easy enough to understand when you're a kid, that's a really heavy bar, or a significant bar, a high bar. There we go, I found it. To overcome. Not having that feel too over emotional or overwhelming as well. I saw this movie with my kids. They understood the message that it was trying to present, and introducing these concepts that hopefully if they deal with any of these mental illnesses, they'll now have the vocabulary to be able to describe that. And somebody who suffers with anxiety, such as myself, having it be presented in a way where we've had this from other films. Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, having mental health be present and a part of the storytelling is a good thing. Hiding these things, presenting them in a way that they don't exist, that does nobody any favors. And there's my Canadianisms coming out. Inside Out 2 manages to deliver these concepts in a intellectual way while not feeling dumbed down to where it's like, listen, kids, let me tell you about all these things. So it doesn't do that. It's a further exploration, not explanation. Well, it's actually both at the same time. A further exploration of Riley's mind and the idea of emotional circumstances. It's a great film. It's on Disney Plus. Check it out. It was the highest grossing film of the year, so I'm guessing if you were listening to this, you probably did see it. Number 2 of my favorite films of 2024, Dune Part 2. If you want a trilogy, well, we're going to get Dune Messiah, but what we get from Denis Villeneuve's Part 2 of the first Dune novel, this is his magnum opus, these first 2 films, and continuing that with Dune Messiah, which will be his trilogy. The irony to me is I've been, over the holiday break, watching the extended cuts of Lord of the Rings, which I had never seen before. It's about 12 hours of film, which is a lot. And I was discussing this with my wife, that they didn't really make movies like this anymore. And the closest thing that I could come up with, which is where you have a blockbuster that has all of the intricacies and attention to detail of something like Lord of the Rings, is Dune. And I would be shocked if we don't get anything of the same caliber from Dune Messiah, knowing that's what Denis Villeneuve's working on next. But I loved Dune Part 1, and the fact that Dune Part 2 does everything the first film did, but better, exploring what Paul Atreides' relationship is with all of the people around him, specifically with Chani Zendaya's character becoming their messiah, the Lisan al-Gaib, and falling into this power and causing this war to happen, realizing that he is the chosen one, or is he, and causing a rebellion against the Harkonnens. It's a insanely big film, but never loses character. And it is a spectacle of spectacles. It did so well critically and financially. And the fact that we're getting another one is incredible. And I'm super happy about that. So it is number 2 on my favorite films of 2024. My favorite film of 2024, my number 1 film, is The Wild Robot, a movie that I had next to zero anticipation for, and it blew me away. I don't, if you're listening to this and didn't see it, when I walked out of the movie, the first thing I did was call my mom. I had an incredible mom, or not, I have an incredible mom. And Chris Saunders and his crew with The Wild Robot take story elements that we are familiar with, but the way in which it's delivered, its exploration of parenting coming from a robotic individual, what does that mean to be a parent? Exploring that relation, that emotional relationship with artificial intelligence, breaking your own programming, going against what would be conventional choices, because being a parent is never conventional. You are constantly having to change and react on the fly, and having that come from a robot, as well as how a robot raising a living thing and how that would code that living being. And it takes what I love about animation, which is its beautiful cinematography, but from a texture standpoint within the CGI models, it applies almost a painterly approach where characters don't feel as if they're just rendered in, that they were created by human hands, making it a beautiful mosaic in a really compelling environment. And it was a slow progression for success, but fortunately, people did wind up finding it and seeing it, and that they did greenlight a sequel, because Roz's story, as well as Bright Bill's, is one I'm definitely looking forward to. So that is why The Wild Robot is my favorite film of 2024. Now, let's get into what my most anticipated films are of 2025. 2025 is going to be a jam-packed year. We've got a lot of incredible big films as well as some smaller ones. So, number 10 for my most anticipated films of 2025, Wicked for Good. I liked part 1. It was on my it was on my favorite films list of 2024. I'm very curious to seeing how all these characters are going to conclude. How's it going to react to having an actual wicked witch of the East and West? How's that going to work in this interpretation of Oz? I'm looking forward to it. Number 9, Fantastic Four and the First Steps. A brilliant cast with a really good director, Matt Shankman. I'm really curious how Marvel Studios is going to approach their first family and what this is going to mean moving forward into Doomsday and Secret Wars. We are going to see Robert Downey Jr. as Doctor Doom in the film, if not in the post-credits. So fingers crossed that this is a continuation on the success of the Marvel Cinematic Universe in 2025. Number 8 is 20 Years Later. 28 Days Later, 28 Weeks Later are incredible movies, and getting a third film in this franchise is not something I necessarily suspected, but I'm really looking forward to it. It has an absolutely stacked cast, and I'm expected to be terrified, but probably also very emotionally moved at the same time. That's why it's number 8. Number 7 on my most anticipated films of 2025, Ballerina. I like Len Wiseman, and getting a spin-off that is an interquel where it takes place after John Wick 3, but before John Wick 4, with Ana de Armas, that sounds incredible, as well as having Chad Stahelski in the producer role. We're getting to explore more of the John Wick universe with the actual rubber stamp of approval, as opposed to the Continental show we got, where they were barely involved whatsoever. So that's why it's number 7. Number 6 on my most anticipated list of 2025 is Thunderbolts Asterix. This is the Marvel movie I am most looking forward to, so that might be a little bit of inside baseball here, or a sneak peek. Having a Task Force X, Suicide Squad, Dark Avengers, whatever label you want to give it, all of these characters together are really compelling to me, particularly with what Bob is going to be, the wrench that he is going to throw into this machine of them trying to successfully fight those who have put them in this deathly scenario. I'm really looking forward to that. Number 5 of my most anticipated films of 2025 is Mission Impossible Final Reckoning. Yes, I know, Paramount, you changed it from Dead Reckoning Part 2. Please send me a new Blu-ray sleeve for my 4K that I bought, because that would be absolutely spectacular. Ethan Hunt's last mission. They've been working on this movie for, I think, 3 years at this point. Christopher McQuarrie has never really let us down. While I didn't love Dead Reckoning as much as I loved Mission Impossible Fallout, given the time that they're working on this, I would be completely shocked if this is not one of the best Mission Impossibles, if not the best, given we know what the expectations are and the height that quite literally Tom Cruise will go to make a good movie. That's a pun. We see him flying on a plane in the trailer. Number 4 is Mickey 17. I love Robert Pattinson, and another film. Well, one second, my computer is not cooperating. Sorry. I apologize for that. But getting another film from Bong Joon-ho, who directed, if you're unfamiliar with his work, oh my goodness, what was the Parasite, as well as Snowpiercer, which is a movie I really did enjoy. I'm really looking forward to this. The dates for this have kind of moved around, which I find is interesting, but this whole clone dynamic and being killed off, but one surviving its fate, what does that do for this society that's been set up? I'm really interested and compelled by that. Number 3 on my most anticipated films of 2025 is Sinners. I really like Ryan Coogler, him reuniting with Michael B. Jordan, telling a horror film that clearly has some sort of twists and dynamics. Michael B. Jordan is playing 2 different characters. What does that mean? We get to see a back and forth of these 2 different men. The poster is kind of leading me to believe maybe they're from different worlds. They're discoloring. Maybe one is a monster, maybe one isn't. I'm very curious about this, and the fact that I'm looking forward to a horror film alone should say what kind of movie this looks like and what kind of movie, how the quality of the film that it could be. Number 2 on my most anticipated film list is Wake Up Dead Man, a Knives Out mystery. I love Knives Out, and I really enjoyed Glass Onion. Go back all the way to 2022 when I reviewed Glass Onion. Rian Johnson is one of my favorite filmmakers, and as he has continued to do with the Knives Out franchise, has stacked another cast. Daniel Craig, Josh O'Connor, Glenn Close, Josh Brolin, Mila Kunis, Jeremy Renner, Kerry Washington, Andrew Scott, Kaylee Spaney, Daryl McCormick, Thomas Hayden Church, Noah Spiegel, who always does cameos, and likely Joseph Gordon-Levitt, who also does cameos. What is this mystery going to be? I recently rewatched Glass Onion, and the setup for that was so different and interesting than Knives Out. What mystery construct or foundation is this going to be? We know next to nothing, but I trust Rian Johnson to deliver another brilliant Benoit Blanc mystery. Number 1 on my most anticipated list for 2025, it has so much expectation behind it. What it's going to mean for a particular universe is a lot. This is the first theatrical film of the DC universe being produced by DC Studios. It's Superman 2025, James Gunn's first film within this universe. We've seen the first trailer. I love Superman. There's a lot riding on the first entry of DCU's Chapter 1, Gods and Monsters. I want to love this. I like a lot of the elements that were teased in the first teaser trailer. I'm curious what we're going to learn from the theatrical trailer or official trailer when we eventually see it, but I want this to be the best Superman movie we've had in a really long time, and that's not to say I didn't like some of the stuff we had before, but there's a lot riding on this film to be successful, and as somebody who prefers the DC universe over the Marvel one, I want this to be amazing, and I really hope that it is incredible. That will wrap up my most anticipated films of 2025. Now let's look at my listener mail and answers to the question of the week, where people told me what their favorite films were of 2024. Last week's question of the week was, what were your favorite films of 2024? David writes in, not based on quality, but on enjoyment and not in any order. Dune Part 2, Deadpool and Wolverine, Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, The Fall Guy, and Carry On. Notes, did not see Wicked, Inside Out 2, or Bike Riders. Okay, interesting. Debbie writes in, Wicked, Wild Robot, Inside Out 2, Dune 2, Kingdom, Planet of the Apes. Scotty Cameron said in a short story, not a novel this time, which I appreciate. Thanks, Scotty. My 5 favorite films of 2024 are in no particular order. Deadpool and Wolverine, Transformers 1. Okay, we agree to disagree there, Scotty, but that's fine. Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare, Furiosa, and Civil War. Civil War is a film I did really like, and Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare was also really entertaining. And then we've got some talk on the DC stuff. Thank you, Scotty. The Batman situation is a messy one right now. When we have a strike and a series between installments that's going to cause delays, James Gunn did not confirm on Blue Sky that The Brave and the Bold and The Batman are still happening and that he plans to keep them separate. Matt Reeves told Gunn that he didn't want his Batman saga to be a part of the shared universe, just a pocket Batman universe. I get the impression Matt Reeves would stop working with DC Studios because that would betray Reeves' wishes, which means Pattinson's go too. That's why James Gunn took to Blue Sky and Threads to confirm what's actually happening. The people claiming Gunn is going to shoehorn the Batman into DCU are the scoopers of social media who constantly lie to their audiences, whether it's Grace Randolph, Jeff Schneider, or Matt McGlone. I actually don't know the third one. So when they're claiming that Gunn will make Pattinson the DCU Batman, and Gunn says that's not happening, I'm going to listen to Gunn over the BS artists and clout goblins. I think John Hamm would make a great Batman, given that the DCU Batman has 5 adopted sons and a mid-teenage biological son. I agree with a lot of that, Scotty. I don't disagree, and I gave my opinion on the Robert Pattinson Batman stuff in last week's episode. Dylan Pollock of Movies to Watch Before You Die, 100,000% agree on hopefully not mixing Pattinson into the DCU. To answer the question of the week, my 5 favorite movies of 2024, not in any order: Carry On / Rebel Ridge, shoving the 2 Netflix movies together and technically cheating to have a 6 favorites. Thank you. Super / The Man, the Christopher Reeve story, the 4:30 movie, Thelma, and The Fall Guy. Thanks so much to everybody who wrote in for the question of the week. It's a simple question with 2 answers for this week's question. What is your most anticipated movie of 2025 and your most anticipated TV show of 2025? To write into the podcast, you can comment directly on Spotify or YouTube or hashtag QOTW on any of the social medias. The podcast, as well as myself, are available everywhere. As well as, I mean, you can't, I guess if you wanted to review it within Apple Podcasts, you could, but then you constantly have to be changing your review. So maybe don't do that. But you could also email the podcast, filmrealistpod@gmail.com, if you want to have an extended answer to the question of the week, or you can send in a voicemail on Anchor FM or whatever it's called, Creator, Spotify, whatever it's called. Now, next week's episode of the pod, no, I'm not going to say that yet. If you are listening on an Apple device, please consider giving the podcast a 5-star review. It would be incredible if the podcast was able to reach an arbitrary number that I'm aware of, but I don't want to put it out there just in case we don't reach it in 2025. I would love for that to be the case, but it helps put the show on the charts. It helps get more awareness for the podcast. If you are listening on any of the Apple devices that is capable of doing so. Next week's episode will be a review of season 1, because we do know it's now been reviewed or renewed, and it will be reviewed, is that of Creature Commandos. The first piece of the DC universe from James Gunn will have its finale, if you're listening to this on release, on the upcoming Thursday. So I will be reviewing it next week. My name is Kyle Naranya. Thank you so much for listening to my celebration of 2024 and my anticipation of 2025. We'll see you next time.